y'all are setting up the day, supposedly. We get butter and coffee.
Not too sure about all
The water's not.
No, I mean, it's still.
Sunday? Friday night. Friday night?
Friday night's on.
I'll trade a little salt for. Yeah, me too.
I don't know. I would have thought it would have been really tough.
How's Kansas?
Lawrence won UCF.
Heading out to
That was a heck of a game.
I walked in at Sweden.
He's doing really good. Came in.
Yeah, you should be there.
That's Saturday night.
Yeah.
You see the picture and Tracy Wilson. Tracy Wilson's like,
get on a nice bike ride or
Yeah.
it's hilarious. He just stand there. He just stand there and block the ball and not leave. He's just like it's like having
really busy, yeah.
they need to spread that ice around a little more. Yeah, to be fair. It worked out okay, I guess. My mom was actually 4'11", so
She's all recovered.
After a certain age, you start getting
Yeah.
What's the grandfather? She's got shorter recap, she broke her stern. So she still got a hand for another month.
I was born
She'll
6
probably
years
do her
ago,
walk.
so that's what's wrong.
Good luck as well. She's
I got two well done.
So at least she's able to do all she told me today, she's like, I'm gonna try to come in next week, help out with like visual exercises and all that, so she's gonna try to get ready to go a little bit. She said, I can't wait right now. Yeah, she'll be better. In the meantime.
I'm busy out.
Well, we have an intern. Really helped out that first one. She kept an extra story. I'm giving her at least a couple stories.
Okay, off of a John Deere, our John Deere. Did you see that thing when we got in earlier? Okay. I don't know why he didn't try the gas. He got gas all over his shirts, and my laundry room now smells like diesel.
They're gonna need
I do have, it will fit
Hey, how you doing?
They tried to do
That's better. Zero currency, because we couldn't get any closer.
Okay.
18 square foot. 3 doors.
Oh, really negotiated.
I seen they were yesterday, I'm like, it was not close.
It's your
It's not gonna be good.
It's too big for my.
Right.
If I ever did need it, I'd want.
Well, I've got a trailer, yeah.
I'm sure that's.
That was like one of the few games I watched where you never had it down.
I told him to use it.
Oh, okay, sure. No, I don't think I'm anything to do. When I bought it, it was a return.
Harper Avenue.
Oh, yeah, that's what I thought.
I got like, it was, you know, half prices, dude. That's $600 cup, it was 22 shirts.
That's what mine was. I got it.
Just where it's.
That's what mine funny is one of those Raptors.
Yeah.
That's what I got.
And I got the jumbo one. I don't know how big it is, 56. Anyway.
Mine's 50.
Well,
54.
I have a 4x8 utility trailer that I use for it.
Yeah, that's what I need to get a pickup truck. Get rid of his car. He's got a seat. Get rid of the Cadillac. Just get the medium size SUV that still fit 7 people. And let me get a pickup, a crew cab pickup. And I may get a Sierra or something else. I said, because I need a pickup bed where I can put plants on and I want to. And now I have to haul that stupid big trailer. I think I'm gonna haul that stupid big trailer around and go to Lowe's and get a whole bunch of mulch, about 60 to 100 bags of mulch.
My little small trailer, I found it somebody wants to Syria.
Yeah.
Haul it out, tires on it. It's got a.
One that's gabled. Yeah. They are, I guess it's one. If you want to borrow the trailer, just call or text me, come in.
Okay.
Borrow the trailer. Okay.
Yeah. Ron's not gonna take it, it's all their truck turns to work. They're taking his birds into the.
Oh.
Yeah, those are some of the. But I don't know, who's supposed to be here?
Yeah, no, that was a big.
But it's 4 o'clock.
That is a big.
I know Beth.
That size lot.
Yeah, where they go.
How are you?
Hi.
Hey, Beth.
Cheers, Ron. How didn't do me.
Did you say you were supposed to be here? I don't know if they're supposed to be here.
Yeah. No, they said they're not going.
Hmm?
So I'm not going right now.
Connie is in the restroom.
Okay.
They may not even get a parking place.
Oh, there's plenty.
Oh, is there?
Oh, yeah. Lindsay.
Well, that's good. Because when I park, student with a book bag coming and get the car in front of me, I park right here on the street. And then after she pulled out, the other student pulled in, got his book bag and left.
Oh, yeah, the kids park on the street, the parking
We have,
street there.
water and
Yeah.
coffee over there, if anybody wants.
They're pretty bad about market everywhere. After he gets through changing all that stuff, tractor, I hope he runs.
Give me the.
Does it have some student?
Yeah, I called him, was it 4?
He was. Ron will not be here. His dad's health is not great. So Ron will be, so. Okay. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started, and, this is a work session, it is a public meeting, but it is a work session for the council, so there will not be interaction with, the public, it will just be between the council members, the city manager, and the staff. So, well, it's all yours.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. So we've got two topics we want to talk to you about this afternoon. First is want to kind of double back. Of course, we met last month on the 15th, and I presented you with the academic detached dwelling unit regulatory materials. The slides are effectively the same. So I'm going to go through these very quickly. Some of you may not have been able to make the meeting on the 15th, and if you were not able to, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. Secondly, and these two are, it was noted at the council meeting Tuesday night that it may make some sense to delay action on Harper Avenue because there is a relationship between the ADDU regulatory framework, and we've got a few outstanding issues that I want to address with you today. And one of those in particular is one where there's just going to be a fundamental difference in opinion between some of the folks in the development community that we've met with and what staff's feelings are. And I want to address those very directly with you. I think that will need to be a decision point for the council to make when this does come back before you next week. So this was just a timeline slide, just to go back and talk a little bit about student housing and its current manifestation, both of the private dormitory variety and now more recently with the academic detached dwelling unit construct. And it's really important that we talk about those together because effectively the regulations are one and the same, with the only difference being that an academic detached dwelling unit takes more of a single unit, single family like form. But when you get inside of an academic detached dwelling unit, the differences between the floor plans become clear in terms of what's conducive to a non-student living arrangement and what's clearly conducive for a student living arrangement, and the differences are fairly evident. So, you know, we went all the way back to 2014 when our first private dormitory was built right across the street from my office there on Ross, and then we spent most of 2015 under a building moratorium. Spent a lot of time reviewing regulations for multifamily development, and all of that was being done concurrently with the downtown master plan process. The downtown master plan in 2015 was beginning to wrap up, and we spent the fall really delving into and developing regulations for private dormitories so that when we were ready to adopt the plan and all the implementing regulations for the plan, that all the regulations for private dormitories can accompany those. And that's in fact what occurred with the downtown master plan being adopted in September of 2015, and the implementing regulations for the downtown master plan, including the regulations for private dormitories, were adopted in March of 2016. A couple years later, we began to see a lot of what's occurred in that Fraser-Canton area and actually other areas in the immediate environs in terms of this academic dwelling unit construct, and we felt it made a lot of sense and prudent to regulate it in a similar fashion as what was developed for private dorms. And in that, a lot of our work had already been done. This is just revisiting the study boundary of the downtown master plan. Of course, the major outcome of the downtown master plan, first and foremost, of course, we dealt with issues like height quite a bit, but really driving and understanding the differences in character of the different areas around the downtown that had all been zoned university service up until the development of these regulations, where we began to really articulate somewhat surgically the different character of the different areas surrounding downtown. And as a result, we created 3 unique zoning districts: the urban neighborhood the urban neighborhood west, east, and south. And this exhibit just illustrates the different urban neighborhoods and where private dormitories are permitted by right and where they're conditional. Of course, there's a lot of talk and a lot of sensitivity in the urban neighborhood south in terms of size, scale, and compatibility, and it was deemed appropriate that any type of private dorm subject itself to conditional use approval. Just some bullet points, some characteristics of private dorms. It's purpose-built student housing, there's no question about that. Typically rents by the bed, often furnished. Leasing terms follow academic terms, and rents are, like I said, by the bed, not by the unit. And floor plans not configured to be suitable for a non-student market. I'm gonna go through these fairly quickly. These are two private dorm floor plans, one in Athens, Georgia, one right here in Auburn. And one of the things we really look at when we're looking at these is the percentage of what we call private space versus common space. Common space being your common living areas, your kitchens, dining rooms, those kinds of things. Private space being obviously bedrooms, ensuite baths. And when you have a private dorm versus a market rate apartment, there's definitely a skew toward a higher percentage of private space versus common. These are just a couple of examples. The Evolve, they've done a number of developments around the country. They got to Knoxville before they came here to Auburn. These are just some comparative figures that we provided, and if we have time, certainly be glad to go back and answer any outstanding questions you might have from our last meeting, simply because the material on Harper Avenue is fairly voluminous, and it will certainly be the first time that you've seen any of that material. Again, looking at the constructs of private dormitories and how the space is more compressed, the bedrooms are smaller, the baths are typically just built for one person with single vanities, and they're also smaller bathrooms than what you'll see in a market rate product. And again, the differences between the percentages of private and common space between the two different constructs, it becomes fairly evident. So now we're at where we are today with the academic detached dwelling unit. Again, want to emphasize the direct relationship between what's in front of you for these. It's very, very similar to what was adopted back in March of 16, and I think is working very well for us on the private dormitory front. These are floor plans. This is an ADDU floor plan, and you can see we've got a number of these that have been constructed. We have many more that are under construction. A lot of them tend to be in the 5-bedroom, 5-bath, or 5-bedroom, 5.5-bath configuration. We've talked previously about some of the parking challenges that we've had, because up until these academic detached dwelling unit regulations are in place, these can only be regulated and reviewed as single family. And one of the particular problems with doing that is the parking is only 2 spaces, 2 off-street spaces for a single family home. And we know that when we've got a 5-bedroom, 5-bath product that's occupied by students, we're gonna have 5 cars and maybe more. These are just some illustrative examples. This was, of course, ground zero for academic detached dwelling units there at the corner of Canton and Frazier. And those are just pictures of the resulting products. We have 30 Drake, which is in somewhat of an issue that we believe presents less compatibility issues. If you've driven by this area recently, you know that it's been entirely clear cut, and they're beginning to prepare the development. Again, those are 5-bedroom, 5.5 baths. They're academic detached dwelling units. There's no ambiguity there. Here's the site plan that's been submitted. Unfortunately, in this case, the developer has provided ample off-street parking, although he was not required to. This is just the definition of an ADDU. Again, it's built largely on the definition of private dormitory. It's been in place now for 3 years. These are the decision points, really the outstanding issues as we understand them to be, largely with those members of the development community that we've met with on multiple occasions in recent months. So there were really 3 issues, 2 of which the staff feels that they are fair observations, they're fair concessions. One being the parking space requirement. We shared this with you before, but just the way that came about is when the original regulation was proposed, the staff had recommended that the parking requirement be 1 space per bed. It was during vetting and discussion with the Planning Commission that one of our Planning Commission members suggested raising that requirement to what we currently require for other types of multiple unit development, which would be 1.1 space per bed. It was requested that we consider going back to the 1 space per bed, and since that's what staff recommended initially, I personally, as the planning director, don't have a problem with that.
Forrest, do you want us to wait on questions, or?
Yeah, I'm almost done.
Okay.
And then, yeah, if you don't mind, and then we'll just take all the questions.
Thanks.
Yes, sir. So now we've got we've got the redevelopment district. That's the decision point that we're just not gonna be able to agree with the development community based on where we currently have RDD. And there's a linkage here because we've also mentioned as we go and do these special focus area studies, we're incrementally removing the redevelopment district from the books, and we're putting in districts that are a little more prescriptive and predictable, in my opinion, as far as development outcomes are concerned. RDD's been a little bit of a catch-all. That's gonna become a little more evident when Tom and Logan present the Harper Avenue material to you, because that's really, we've removed so much RDD that there's not a whole lot left. And much of what is left is in the Harper Avenue focus area study. But much of that RDD is proposed to change. In fact, all of it is proposed to change to another district. And that new district, which we're calling medium density residential district, we're also recommending that academic detached dwelling units in that area be require conditional use approval. So that doesn't really change anything in terms of the differences in opinion on that particular issue. And then finally, neighborhood redevelopment district, that is the area where we've seen a lot of, that's the new zoning designation that had been RDD for a lot of the area in that Fraser, Canton, and those environs that the development community is requested be conditional. Staff initially recommended that it not be permitted. We've had a lot of discussion. I know there are differences in opinion, but because so much academic detached dwelling unit activity has already occurred in that neighborhood, then you become to question, now that it's actually taken up so much of the area, are there really going to be compatibility issues if new academic detached dwelling units come in? That's a good point. So we've conceded that it probably makes some sense to go ahead and make that a conditional use in that particular district. So that would, again, that's 2 of 3 issues that I think we've been successful meeting with the development community on and reaching some fair agreement and compromise with, of course, the RDD issue to be permitted or to be conditional is the outstanding issue that I think we're just going to honestly say we're just going to agree to disagree. I also want to emphasize one of the major themes and outcomes of the Northwest Auburn plan was we were very adamant. One of the big issues was continued student housing intrusion. And so I don't want to understate the importance of this asterisk as it relates to these 2 districts, meaning that if you wanted to have an academic detached dwelling unit, they would only be allowed under this proposal conditionally in east of North Donahue Drive only. We have 2 areas of Northwest Auburn, and when I refer to Northwest Auburn, I mean west of Donahue, north of Martin Luther King, by and large. The Cordino property, which you're very familiar with, that's zoned RDD, and some Auburn Housing Authority property that is zoned RDD. There's also some property that's back behind Martin Luther King Drive, back behind some corridor redevelopment zoning, that was also rezoned to NRD. And that's really, I think, that's as critical a piece of property as the Cordino property is, because it really is surrounded by single-family residents. So we wanted to make sure that this proposal is couched with that caveat, that even if the property's owned RDD or NRD and it's west of Donahue, it will not be eligible. Academic detached dwelling units would not be permitted on those properties, period.
Will there be a map that will show that distinct designation?
It'll actually be in the code,
okay.
And then we'll have asterisks also by NRD on the actual legend of the zoning map.
Okay.
And we have other regulations that are similar to that in the ordinance already. So we're pretty good about staying on top of that, knowing what you can do and what you can't do, where you can and can't do.
So you're saying this would be a one-off, that we've done this in other areas where certain zoning is allowed, but it's based on geographical location.
Right. That's right. That's all the slides I have on the ADDUs since we went through the presentation last month. But I did want to update you, so here's where we're at now. I really do believe it's a good proposal. There are just those 3 issues where we've been asked to consider some changes, And it's been multiple meetings with the development community, largely a handful of gentlemen that are in the business of developing these particular type of housing products. And I feel pretty good about the fact that we were able to knock 2 of the 3 out, but we've left you with one that you're gonna have to deal with and certainly make a decision on, whether that be this coming Tuesday or a subsequent city council meeting. And I also, at this point, bear in mind that these 3 issues have come up since the Planning Commission disposed of the matter. So I wanted to wait until this meeting, but sometime during the course of this week, I certainly need as planning director to double back with the Planning Commission, just to update them as to where these changes are. Not that these changes would rise to the level of formally having to go back to them, but I just want to make sure that they're brought up to speed on where we're at with the proposal.
Forrest, what's the major difference between NRD and RDD?
What's permitted? Neighborhood redevelopment districts largely limit to residential use only.
Okay.
RDD, and one reason why it's caused us a lot of problems is, essentially, just about anything can be permitted in RDD, but also just about everything requires conditional use approval. That's really caused a lot of consternation with the development community in terms of predictability of outcomes and time frames for project approvals. But it's also, I've always said this, we've got sort of 2 zoning, and have had for years, in my opinion, after evaluating the ordinance and been here long enough to feel like I've got a really good hold on our zoning framework. RDD is kind of a residential zoning time bomb, and CDD is a kind of our commercial time bomb. And so what we've been doing is, as we go into areas vis-a-vis focus area studies, you will see that we have been very deliberately removing CDD as we go through the city geographically. We're doing the same for RDD, and we're in place of those designations, we're providing more prescriptive, more predictable zoning designations, which I think is good for the city and the development community.
So in other words, cause I'm just a little confused, this new, I guess, whatever we decide on next Tuesday night, it's gonna prevent, the developers to come in and build these, ADD units in Northwest Auburn, where the Cardino property in the area.
Anything to connect and cannot go west of North Donnie.
Okay, all right, I understand that part. Now, I'm gonna go back to Canton and Fraser.
Sure.
But this is not gonna affect that area.
Well, it will, to the extent that we will have, in you, the city council, I should say, will have regulatory purview over academic detached dwelling units in the NRD zone by virtue of the conditional use review and approval process. Meaning, if let's say this is adopted tomorrow and someone comes in next week with an application for an academic detached dwelling unit, we're not going to be able to permit that by right. We're going to tell them they're going to have to go through a conditional use approval process, which means it goes before the Planning Commission, the public hearing is reviewed by them, staff reviews it, provides a recommendation, and then ultimately it will come to you to make a decision whether or not that use is approved on that particular piece of property, based on the council weighing the Planning Commission recommendation, the staff recommendation, and certainly whatever the council ultimately feels is appropriate. You're the ultimate decision maker on conditional uses.
Okay, so that's going forward, but, so at this point, far as I guess I'm asking, and you know, I see that, you know, they're still building.
Yes.
There, but what they building now is what they're just gonna, you know, that's gonna proceed, I know. But going forward, they're not gonna be able to do that, right? Is that what you're saying?
They will be able to continue to do it until these regulations are adopted.
Okay.
And if they've already been permitted, when I say permitted, like permitted to.
Yes, if they have a building permit in hand, as long as that building permit is not expired, if they have a building permit in hand before these regulations are in effect, they will be able to continue to build that product.
Forrest, there's a section on there between Sanders and North College that is in the historic district. Is that a mistake or is that?
Oh, that's because that's all gonna be neighborhood conservation. So It's protected. If it's not, if it's gray, it's, academic detached dwelling units are not allowed,
No,
period.
it's pink.
Okay,
Let's see, if you have, go straight up in South College, and where it first starts turning pink over in Ward 3, just to the left, yeah, right there.
and here?
No, up, left, right there, well, right there.
Here?
Yeah,
That is,
that's where the bed and breakfast is, that's where,
bed and breakfast I know is on neighborhood
it's in that
conservation.
block. It's that whole, it's that, yeah, right there.
We'll take a look at that just in case there's a map error, and we can, I don't think I've actually got the underlying zoning available to me at present.
Okay.
We'll certainly look at that.
There's one little small isolated area on McKinley that's that's conditional,
Right there.
yeah.
Oh,
How did you guys come up with, I guess, the mapping to,
this is all zoning based.
okay,
So if we were to go back and look at that table of permitted uses that I've got on one of the narrative slides, all this is doing is mapping. For example, these are the 3 urban neighborhood districts where it's been recommended that these be permitted by right. And then this is CRDU and CRDS, all up and down Opelika Road. This is that NRD area that we talked about.
That property at the corner of Thatch and Dean Road is the library. And it's
Yeah, that's
zoned
the library.
RDE, and
thank you.
you'll be seeing a proposal for that area in the future that's gonna change that to a different zoning district that would not permit that.
That's a good point. How much is, we talked about that, the Glen Dean rezoning of the overlay. How much of the ADDU conditional is that we propose rezoning gonna affect there on?
Along Glen, there is no RDD, so that won't happen.
Glen will be the biggest change, and you're gonna see this in just a little bit when Tom and Logan get up here, is that, as I mentioned before, the vast majority of the Harper Avenue focus area study is RDD, and for the reasons I mentioned before, we're trying to get rid of it. And so we've created some additional zoning designations, one of which is medium density residential district. That will replace the redevelopment district if the Harper Avenue focus area study is ultimately approved and the zoning implementation is approved next week or again at a subsequent meeting. But as far as the staff recommendation concern goes on that particular issue, we're still recommending that even though the property is going to be rezoned to medium density residential district for a number of reasons, we're still recommending that academic detached dwelling units, if proposed, require conditional use approval. Just because it's not, you're gonna see a lot of figures on this study. A lot of this, the majority of the study areas are occupied. I know that doesn't surprise anybody, but you still got some substantial hamlets of single family areas. We're seeing more infill and redevelopment, but some of that is of the townhouse variety. We still think there's a reason to be concerned about compatibility and sensitivity issues in that area. So all we're saying is we think the city is better served by having the opportunity to look at those on a case-by-case basis, and the conditional use process enables us to do that.
And I wanna ask a question, and this is gonna go way, way back, and it may be before your time. But, at what point did that, Canyon Fraser area become, what is it, RDD?
1984.
Okay, before that, it was what?
Before that, the city of Auburn had a zoning ordinance that was a Euclidean zoning ordinance. It would have been some type of residential district like R3, R4. Euclidean, in a Euclidean construct, all the zoning designations are very use specific. So you have a lot more zones in a Euclidean ordinance, but each zone is much more limiting in terms of what it allows. You have a multi-family zoning district, period. And that's all that's allowed. You have a single family zoning district, and that's all that's allowed. I highly suspect that it was a single family zoning district prior to 1984.
So it never was NC?
It was never, NC was a new zoning designation that was created as part of the city of Auburn zoning ordinance was effectively repealed in its entirety, and a whole new zoning ordinance was adopted in 1984. So all the former zoning designations went away, all new zoning designations came into play, all in one fell swoop. But I feel very confident that that area was a single-family zoning district only pre-1984.
Is it, and I think what, I'm gonna put it words in your mouth, but is an NC pretty safe in R1? And you could, I mean.
In that they're both effectively single-family only zones, yes.
So in our new format, if that area hadn't been converted to an RDD, it probably would have been NC, we kept it.
I believe that's correct.
So somebody down the line had to make a decision, say, well, okay, we wanna take this area here and we wanna change it to, in order for them to build the units they doing in there. See, I guess that's where I'm confused at, and I'm sorry if everybody don't understand, but I'm trying to understand this thing, how it happened, that we done took a neighborhood and turned it into a student housing. So, you know, I'm just trying to figure out, and I think that's the mindset of the people, and even in the neighborhood, how did we get to this point, when it used to be just a neighborhood, you know? And so somebody had to rezone it at some point in order for this to happen, that's happening now. And so that had to be, prior to 1984, after 1984.
I think 1984 was the year it was done.
So did it go through the city council, it went through planning, and then everybody on the city
Yes.
council? Okay, so we need,
But it
I need
was
to find
a
who's on the council
massive-
in 1984.
There's nothing more significant that you can undertake in the planning realm than to actually repeal a zoning ordinance in its entirety and replace it. For those that were here then, it was a very lengthy, highly contentious process, because you're actually affecting development rights for the entire city. Some are benefiting, some are losing. And I can only imagine what it must have been like to be in that position at that time, because that is the most significant, contentious undertaking you can take in the planning and zoning profession.
And two things with that 1984 change to the RDD, it allowed single-family houses. And we're talking about, you know, single-family houses, how it's designed, who lives in it wouldn't necessarily be a family, but the RDD allowed up to the 5 unrelateds. We really, the planning world has not seen student housing like this until about 10 years ago, and it's going on throughout the country that people are building a house that's going to be occupied by 5 students that nobody else will want to live in. And that just so happens that neighborhood up to that point, people weren't building that type of housing, and we didn't have a definition that said this is a single-family designed house because it's got a bigger living room, kitchen, fewer bedrooms, smaller bedrooms, not as many bathrooms. And they came in and said, well, people that live out in the far areas are building 6-bedroom homes with 6 baths for their friends. Why is that any different than us building a 5-bedroom? So we had to figure out the way to say, yeah, but what you're building, I, as a family person, wouldn't want to rent with my family. And that's where this ADDU is really coming in. We're trying to define what they're building is not a single-family house. It's something totally different that doesn't appeal to someone like you or any of the other council members with family.
And the housing trends and types and history will bear this out. Just even here in Auburn, it goes through, I'm not gonna call them fads, but I will call them trends. You know, a lot of the duplex development, that was the housing type that was being built back in the 90s. More recently, in the planning profession, clearly is evidence of this. You know, new urbanism has been the jargon in planning now for at least the past 10 to 15 years. Infill redevelopment, all those principles that are espoused in the comp plan to make the cities make wise use of our infrastructure and resources so that we're not constantly extending utility lines in ways that are inefficient and that over the long term we can't afford. And this is where student housing trends are coming. All the students, they want to be in close to town, they want to walk where they can go. And the location of this neighborhood is absolutely great. The market forces just haven't been in place for the 30 to 35 year period prior for this to happen. The zoning actually hasn't changed in that long, but it's the market that's really dictating this demand and a lot of what you've been seeing around town over the past 3 to 5 year period.
Do you have a comparison sister city that's kind of going through the same thing to look at when you
Probably the planning director that I talk to the most, college town wise, is Brad Griffin, who's he's longtime planning director for Athens, Clark County. And what I've found in the many years I've talked to him, and I was here for a year, and I went out there and scheduled a field trip just to kind of form that relationship. But probably because of the proximity to the Atlanta market, we tend to lag behind Athens by a couple of years. So if I ever want to find out what's going to happen in Auburn, I call him because he's already got it. And so in that regard, it makes the fact that we lag a little bit gives us a little bit of an advantage. But I'm telling you, if you look, one of the big examples I used recently was Bryan College Station. They have the same thing going on there. They call them different things. They call them ag shacks in College Station. They call them stealth dorms in Bryan, but it's the same thing that we're seeing here. And it's much more prolific there. So I'm not trying to minimize our challenges, but I am saying a lot of things when you think about how good or bad they are, sometimes you can't totally digest them until you draw some relative comparisons. And based on what based on what I've seen experience in places like Athens and College Station, I would say we're in pretty darn good shape.
So
Are
George,
these-
go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, are these areas set in stone, like what's conditional and what's permitted, or is that?
Those are anything in this proposal can be adjusted. This is what staff's recommending based on our understanding of the zoning scheme of the city and all the different work that we've done in all these different focus areas over the past several years. This is what we're recommending that be done. Obviously, any other can be adjusted as the council sees fit.
I just see some areas in here where it's really close to some neighbors or to some neighborhoods where some people are gonna be hearing parties and things like that. I just have concerns about particularly Payne Street and Detached. That there's quite a few people that live on Payne Street.
You've pretty much got on the west side here, or I should say, on the Armstrong side, backing up to the houses that are on the west side of Payne Street.
Right.
That's pretty much built out multifamily already.
Okay.
So Forrest, why, if it's not desired, not advocating for this one way or the other, I'm just asking a question, but if in Northwest Auburn, it's not desired to have ADDUs or, in that area, then why wouldn't we just rezone that area to prohibit this type of housing?
Well, we considered doing just that with the Corradino property, but, and I'm particularly sensitive to it in this state, knowing what I know about Alabama law versus Florida law, but if the city proactively, especially if there's the potential for a community project, if we go in and just on a spot or on a parcel by parcel basis, which is kind of what we'd be doing if we were like, the Corradino property's odd because it's RDD surrounded by other zoning. So it's an oddity to begin with. But if we were to go in, I believe, as the city and just unilaterally do a staff initiated rezoning, I have no doubt we would be sued in very short order. And I also have no doubt that we would lose that lawsuit. And I'm not a lawyer, but I know enough about zoning that that's what would happen.
So how, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
So how's that different from stating west of this area or north of this area, it's not allowed within the same type of zoning?
Well,
Or it's conditional?
I think to the extent that they're having a development right taken away, it's much less onerous. All we're really saying is that you still got your RDD, you still got your density. The only thing you can't do now that you could do previously is build academic detached dwelling units.
Okay, so why wouldn't we do that South College West, North College West, where you see Cecil Lane, White Street, why wouldn't we change the verbiage to say academic detached ADDU, nothing west of North College?
We could do that. What I was, and maybe I was drawing the wrong conclusions, but a lot of what I was hearing through a lot of the deliberation of the council and the others was, when you take a look at the Fraser-Cant area, is it better to stop it now and not allow it, recognizing that the neighborhood is already turned, meaning the folks that are still there with single families, may be detrimentally impacted in terms of not being able to sell their property. And that was the original recommendation by staff, was that it not be allowed there. But based on the conversations that we were hearing over the past several months and taking into effect what the development community was seeking, we said, okay, well, at least with a conditional use approval or a conditional use process, we get to take a look at it on a case-by-case basis, give a recommendation, the planning commission gets to see it, and ultimately you get to make the call as a city council.
And does the conditional use designation allow some, I guess, more input from the planning staff of what type of products the city is seeking in those areas, if it were to?
Not necessarily, but we've got to look at it based on what the product's proposed, and what the conditional use process does allow us to do is take a look at properties around it. Do we think there's a compatibility issue? If we do think there's a compatibility issue, do we think there could be additional conditions that might be able to mitigate those, that would enable us to support it with conditions? So it just allows us to kind of get into the weeds and really, instead of just saying it's permitted by right, we get that opportunity to look at the proposal on a case-by-case basis, because every property is unique, and obviously what's around it is different as well on a parcel-by-parcel basis.
If we don't pass this ordinance, we would regulate under an occupancy issue.
If the ordinance just dies, then we're back to where we are today, which is academic detached dwelling units. These would have to be reviewed and regulated and classified as single-family homes. And, you know, for better or worse, and I try to balance as a planning director, things I feel strongly about, not putting myself in an advocacy role, but really just trying to provide what we believe are good planning and zoning solutions that will benefit us. But I do think, and opinions vary, the fact that as this proposal became at least quasi-imminent, that the permitting activity for these things has been incredible, which tells me that it's having an impact. Meaning, I think it needs to be regulated. And the fact that we're seeing a plethora of permitting activity for folks, I think, is sort of evidence of that to some extent. And I think the answer is not to just allow these to continue to be permitted as single-family residences. I think if we do that, we're going to look back 5 years from now and we're going to be sorry. That's my personal opinion. And professional.
As far as you look at the map again, the area straight across the street from the depot is conditional. Right there, right there.
It is.
Yeah, I don't think we want these there either. That's, you got, again, there are historic district homes there, or structures there.
Mm-hmm.
And you got the church is renovating all kinds of things. So that little square right there above the Mitcham Avenue logo.
Right. Yep.
And I'm not real sure we want them all the way up North College up there south of Shelton Mill either. Anything?
Yeah, this is all going to be RDD up in here, of course, just to give you some, if you've been up Northgate recently,
Yeah,
you know that
Northgate on that side.
Joel Funderburk townhomes and all the Avenue stuff's going on up here. There's a lot of duplex. This was the really bad College Arms Apartments that was recently entirely remodeled.
Right.
So most of that in here is going to be of the multifamily variety. But no, those are, if the council wants to dial some of that back down and bring some of those areas, not allow ADUs to extend that far, then certainly that can be done.
I was just thinking that's a major gateway into downtown, and as you're coming down North College from 280 or whatever, first thing you want, you really don't want to see a lot of things that are already happening downtown, but you don't want to see all the ag shacks or whatever as you're approaching town either, I wouldn't think.
Again, a lot of this area has redeveloped already, but again, everything that you see that's conditional is basically indicative of where we've got existing RDD zoning. Those are really the only places we have RDD left, other than those two pockets of the Cordino property, the Housing Authority property. We've got RDD up in here, And we've still got RDD that is very shortly proposed to change. So RDD, if the Harper Avenue study gets effectuated, you're pretty much just looking at this being the last pocket of redevelopment of the city.
What is the housing authority property, where is it?
Right up here. It's much smaller in terms of acreage than the Cordino property, but there's just a little pocket of RDD that's right up there. Any other questions on the ADDU component? It'll come back into play a little bit. Tom's gonna touch a little bit on ADDUs as it relates to the Harper Avenue focus area study, but their material is much more voluminous than what I've shared with you, so.
Yeah, I want to go back to the parking thing.
Yes.
I had some developers approach me and say that if we left it at 1.1, what it basically does is require them to have one space, which would have been gravel, because of the impervious surface ratio business. I don't know if that's the accuracy of that. But they couldn't put 5 spaces on a 4-bedroom lot because the lot size was small to start with, and then that would.
And again, that's under the assumption that they want to continue to build 5-bedroom, 5-bath products. So I mean, they could always take it away from their footprint to get that space that they need, but they're obviously going to be looking to maximize the utility of their property.
Well, 1.1 basically means they need one extra. They'll
Right,
have a
round up.
4-bedroom, they're gonna have 5 parking places if they have whatever.
Yep.
So right now, if we go with the 1, that means that any guest, any visitor, they're going on the street.
That's a fair conclusion to draw.
I don't know, I think I really like the 1.1 myself, just because of the fact that it gets the visitors off the street. If they have to build a gravel or some kind of impervious surface for their lot, that's the consequences of it, and so be it. That's my opinion.
But the housing that they're building now on Canton, they've already built the ones, if you come in off of Fraser and going down Canton, they already built those on the left-hand side, but the ones they're building on the right-hand side, they appear to be bigger than the ones on the left-hand side. Do they have more bedrooms? Because right now, they look to me to be a bigger home than the one opposite of them. And those on the opposite side are 5-bedroom, 5-bath.
Right.
But the ones they're building now, which is directly behind you,
I
those
believe
houses,
if the-
and, let me just say this, when it went through the planning commission, and they said it was gonna build 5 of them, but it's 6 of them they put there. And the houses seem to be bigger. So what happened there? Because I don't see where they're gonna be able to.
What was in front of the planning commission there was a plat, so however many lots they got approved is how many lots they could build on. And I don't recall if it was 5 or 6, but if they can't build more units than the number of lots they created with that subdivision.
I think they bought something along the way.
Now, they may have bought
I think they
adjacent
bought another
property.
lot. So that may be how they end up with 6 of them now. But I'm just trying to figure out, the ones that they're building on now, they appear to be, they hadn't finished them, but they appear to be a lot bigger than the ones across from them.
And I believe you're right. I believe they are bigger. I also believe in Tyler, who's our current principal planner, who's sitting back there. He can answer this definitively because he reviews all these plans in much greater detail than I do. But my recollection is that those units are effectively voluntarily providing 1 space per bed off street in terms of parking, which is not what the developer that has the current units did. So you should not experience the same problems. Having said that, to his credit, under our current regulatory framework, he didn't have to do that. But he's recognized. And as a practical matter, I think if I'm a developer and I'm building these things and I'm spending the money I'm spending and I'm getting the money I'm getting, and I know that these kids, for what they're paying per bed, they're gonna want their own parking space. And I think the majority of developers understand that and would likely provide it regardless. Chris Birdsong, who owns the ones over at Drake and Gay, he's building those 4 or 5 bed, 5.5 units. He's providing enough parking off street. because I think he recognizes that every kid's gonna have a car and every kid's gonna have their own parking space. And a lot of people
And
are
that may be
comfortable
true,
with
but
cars.
I just can't see it. Maybe once it's done, I can't even see. It's 6 units, there are 5 cars, 30 cars, I can't even see it. I can't see that they got enough area to park.
I'll be glad to pull the plans. My recollection is that they're meeting 1 space per bed off street. But we can pull the plans and we can give a definitive answer to that.
Oh, those properties are all gonna park along the back, that back fence.
Yeah, in my back door, I got you.
Right.
I understand that
And
part.
that's where it'll be, as if it would lined off with parking spaces there, so that's where it'll be, I agree with what Forrest says, it is.
They'll at least have
Satisfied.
garages.
No.
No, most do not. Some do, most don't. And then the ones that do typically are only gonna park 2 in a garage. Right. Everybody else will be out in a surface lot.
So are they gonna come down Canton, go in the back and park, and come back up on, is they gonna have to bag out? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Consider it a parking lot behind the houses, that'll all be connected. And it'll function as a two-way, a one-way in, one-way out. I mean, it's a two-way entrance, right? In and out. In the middle of the homes, comes in, opens up, and it's like a parking lot behind the house.
They'll have to meet all the requirements for parking lot configuration in terms of the size of the stalls, the aisle width, whatever is necessary for them to be able to effectively get in and out with not running into each other, obviously. That's essentially what they're doing, is what Tyler described.
That's correct.
So is there any type of privacy fence going up, any type of private?
I think I remember during the conditional use that being a condition of the use approval. But this is, I'd prefer to look at the plans and talk about the plan. We've seen so many of them.
Okay, it's about 10 till 5, and these gentlemen have a lot more material than I have, so if it's all right, I'm gonna turn it over to Tom Weintraub. He's our principal planner of long-range planning. So he's typically our project manager on all of our focus area studies. And then one of our newer members to our staff, who's been here a year, give or take, Logan Kip, is one of our 3 planners on staff. So we do all of our projects in teams, and this one's no different. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Tom, and we'll get started on Harper Avenue.
One more question. If we
Yes.
do have tweaks of things,
Yes.
the 3 areas that you said, you talked about parking, conditional, and what was the third one? ADUs being permitted conditionally in the neighborhood redevelopment district. Previously, it was proposed that they not be permitted by staff. Right.
Whether or not they will be permitted by right or require conditional use approval in RDD is number 2. And then number 3 is 1.1 space per bed or 1 per bed.
So if we have opinions on those 3 things, are we supposed to at council or?
The way that worked in the time I recall something like this happening was when the downtown master plan was adopted in 2016, and there were 2 changes that the council wanted made, and those changes were made as part of their approving motion.
Okay.
And one was the infamous building height issue, and the second was expanding the boundary of the urban neighborhood south northward. So what happens legally is those get articulated as conditions of approval in the minutes.
Okay.
That's what enables us to not have to re-advertise the ordinance. What we then do is we change the ordinance to reflect those changes after you adopt it. That goes to the city clerk. She then publishes a post-approval advertisement. That is the final legal document that reflects that ordinance. And so I would think that in this case, where we've got a few issues or a few items that may get adjusted, that were not adjusted after they left planning, that same process would ensue.
So bottom line, we sort it out at council next week.
Yes.
That would be consistent with what I've observed in the past.
Okay, thank you.
So our focus area, this area was identified in the original comp plan as an area that needed further study. And as Forrest alluded to, a lot of it is because of that redevelopment or RDD zoning, which when it came in 84, basically said these are areas that we want to see redeveloped. We're gonna look at them basically on a case-by-case basis. When somebody comes in, it's gonna be a conditional use approval, which really kind of slows down the process and again makes developers a little leery about trying to do some redevelopment. So we have the railroad track here. This is Glen Avenue along here. Over here is Dean Road. So this will be looked at with the Glen Dean project. And then this is backing up on the Urban Neighborhood East, which was part of the downtown study. So that this area has already been looked at. So we're taking this chunk that's close to downtown now and looking at further it in. Yeah. And that's just an outline, an aerial view, again showing the boundaries of the property. A little bit goes below East Glen, and that's because this area in here is zoned RDD, and it's the only thing left in that area, and we wanted to be able to address that. Logan's going to talk about some of the existing conditions.
Okay. So we went through and just kind of took some pictures of the existing neighborhood. As part of focus area studies, we look at how's the housing types that are out there now versus what we typically see in the city. That's true for commercial as well as residential. You'll see a lot of these, and we'll go into a little bit more detail, are either non-conforming, meaning they wouldn't be allowed to be rebuilt if they were ever destroyed, or wouldn't be allowed to be built today, or they're just undersized or not necessarily fitting in with what we typically see in today's market.
Would you differentiate which ones would be allowed now?
Let's see. So this is just an example of kind of a obviously undersized housing that was probably built in the 20s or 30s. Yeah. So pretty old. This is a duplex that's in an NC zone. So we don't allow anything other than single family in NC. There's several other, if you drive through the neighborhood, there's several examples of this. This is a more recent multifamily that's in, I believe, NC.
No, this is in the
Okay.
RDD.
RDD allows 16 dwelling units per acre, which is the highest of anything other than in the downtown area. So we've run into compatibility issues with that level of density matched up with single family neighborhoods. There is some commercial and office uses in the neighborhood. This is office use.
Is your exhibit B what it currently is on?
That's right. Yeah, you've got some materials in front of you that we'll kind of go over with you. There is a lot of material, so if you run into any questions or doubts, feel free to stop us.
So that commercial one you just showed?
Sure.
Is that permitted or not permitted under your?
It's currently permitted. This is in CDD. It's on the corner of Old Stage Road, and Summerhill on the right. Yeah, on
So under your revised thing, would that no longer be permitted?
it would still be permitted.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things we do when we're trying to figure out what's the best zoning match, about what's the best controlling use match, is to make sure we don't create any more non-conforming uses. We don't want to put anyone in a position where if their property was damaged or destroyed, they wouldn't be able to rebuild. We also looked at some of the recent development, and this helps to guide us kind of and see what future developments might take place in the area. This is on DeBartolais.
That is a duplex, by the way. So
Looks like a house, but it's a duplex, that's right. The boulevard, as well as their additions, are considered multifamily, and they're in RDD. This is another duplex. And these are some townhomes that have taken place, or have been approved, and they're
you'll see these constructed, the last one and this one are being constructed on Ryan, just north of Glen.
So these are some of the things that we looked at is, and as well as demographic information and kind of historical data. These are tools that help to guide us, determine what we think the future trend is for the
So we start out by looking at, there's a total of 210 parcels in that neighborhood, about 86 acres, almost 87. And we looked at each individual site, and there were 134 lots that had single unit houses or single family. Some duplex was 21, there's 25 vacant parcels, and some commercial parcels. I'm left-handed, so this is really confusing now because it's going back. And then from those residential parcels that were single family, then we broke it down into how many were owner occupied, and 39 of those, or 19%, were owner occupied. Then we looked at how many people owned property there that lived in Auburn but not on that site, people in Alabama, out-of-state owners, and then we had 67 parcels that were had the same owner, in a group, but they lived in Auburn, and we'll see some of those in a moment. Okay, sorry about that.
87% of this area is rental or commercial?
About, when we initially did this data is going to reflect about 33% was owner occupied. But at this point, some of that's been updated. We've got slides that talk about 2018, where we were starting out on 2016 data. So this is that local ownership, but multiple parcels. So these here are the top owners. Fucci owns, had owned 13 parcels. I think maybe sold one of those. But these are the ones that have a lot of pieces of land that could be combined and could have a larger development as part of that process. With that owner occupied, we looked at all three of the zoning districts. There are only 3 zoning districts. 2 of them are neighborhood conservation and then the RDD. So here we've got the total number of 29% is zoned NC5, 7% was NC12, and 61% was RDD. And with that then, the NC5, 33% of that area is owner occupied, 14% is undeveloped or vacant, and then the NC12 a little less, and then the RDD, we have 11.6% that is owner occupied, and 18% of that property is vacant. And then looking at the zoning, and again, against the owner occupied, in the NC5 district, there's 65 parcels that are, or 63 parcels that were owner occupied, 15 in the, 63 total parcels zoned NC5, 15 zoned NC12, 132 are RDD. So there's a lot of RDD property out there to make up that 210. Of those, 21 are owner occupied in the NC5, 3 in the NC12, 16 in the RDD, making up a total of 40 parcels. And then undeveloped parcels on the end, you can see that overall there's about 34 different parcels that have not been developed. Some of those are under common ownership. Okay, looking at the area that's zoned RDD, so this is everything out there that's zoned RDD right now. Looking at when the units were built, most of them were built before 1970. So 1970 to 79, we had 2, 1, 1, 2, and then this sort of reflects what's going on in the boulevard area. So we start to see the redevelopment there. The average square foot, 9,000 or 948 in 1929, and you can kind of see how it goes up and down. So we looked at the average size of the house because a lot of times structures become obsolete because they're too small for what a current family would want. And then in the NC zoned areas here, everything north of Harper is NC5, and these here were NC12. And if you look here, by 1979, there really hasn't been any new development in that area. And then looking at the average area, most of these homes run probably in about a 1,400 square foot floor plan, which is a good entry level home for families, but it's obviously a stepping stone process. And then,
So yeah, we use all this data, and if there'll be some more demographic data that we'll look at to guide us here. And this shows kind of the age of structures by decade or by kind of era, with the darker orange being the oldest and lighter kind of beige color being more recent development, and gray being no data available. So here's some census and demographic data that we looked at. We really want to see, and it's one of the driving forces of why we're making these recommendations, to try and encourage redevelopment, try and encourage infill redevelopment, especially of the residential type. The area is predominantly renter occupied already, at 78% renter occupied. The kind of home values are a lot lower than you would typically see in Auburn, $96 per square foot in the study area versus $125 citywide. Another interesting kind of trend that we saw and that lends itself to our recommendation is in this area there's a lot of folks, given proximity to campus and downtown, there's a lot of folks that are carpooling, walking, using transit. So something kind of interesting about this location is ideal for more urban residential infill. Okay, future land use. The future land use, just kind of refresh everyone. It's different from the zoning. The future land use guides us in thinking about the long-term implications, the long-term picture for the neighborhood. As Forrest was saying, a lot of these neighborhoods haven't been looked at since 1984. So you can imagine there's a lot of changes that have taken place, a lot of changes that need to take place to accommodate growth, to accommodate what the residents want in the neighborhood, as well as future investment opportunities. So the existing, we see that there's a lot of future land use designation of mixed use office, but when we went and looked at the actual land use there and what's we kind of expect to see.
Excuse me, Logan.
Yes.
I can't read the color gradings, if you wouldn't mind explaining
Sure.
that.
So this, in the stripe here and here, it's mixed use office residential. Calls for an ideal mix of about 75% office and 25% residential. There are some offices on here, but mostly it's residential. So it doesn't quite fit what's there now and kind of what we would expect to see in the future. That high level office is pretty high. 75% is quite a lot. The other major kind of change that I'll show you here is this is medium high density residential. So the kind of the boulevard area, and I think this is a Deer. I always get the two confused. There's Deerfield and there's Deerwood, yeah. So that in the future proposal, we would like to see that expanded out to really accommodate future infill residential growth, and changing that office residential to a mixed use 2. Mixed use 2 still allows for office, still allows for commercial, residential, but it encourages vertical and horizontal mixed use instead of just single uses.
Is the business back there, the Camco, old Camco, are we still talking about that area? Used to be a business back there called Camco.
I
Is it
don't
still?
know, is it back here on stage?
Yeah.
It may still be there, but that's one of the issues that we were going to address.
It's off of Harper.
It's on Harper, right?
Yeah, it's off of Harper, and if you turn, like, going up, yeah, right in there.
Between Gideon and Summer Street.
Yeah, it used-
T-shaped, the biggest.
Does it sit like way back off the road?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
Is it still there?
I think that was bought by the developers of the boulevard, and they're going to do another phase of the boulevard in that area. So it used to be, was a vending company, was that?
Yeah, that's what it will count for.
Yeah, so that has been sold. I think that was one of the properties that has changed hands since we started the study. So it's no longer going to be there. The boulevard people have bought it. So looking at our zoning, most of this being RDD and then the 2 NC neighborhoods, everything here is conditional. And by being conditional, it really doesn't give much certainty to developers. Again, going backwards. And it's both, the NCs allow for single family only, and then some uses like parks or maybe a church. But in the RDD, single family is the only thing that's permitted. And as we talked about earlier, we don't really have a definition to determine the difference between single family and a 5-bedroom student unit. That's a single unit. Most every other thing is permitted conditionally. Private dormitory is not permitted at all. Most of the commercial uses are conditional, with the exception, I think, office and maybe some really innocuous uses. So the proposal is to look at those. This is currently the zoning around it, and you can see the RDD. We've got the urban down here. I guess I could just use this button. And then the Opelika Road, when this plan was adopted, we had the corridor redevelopment urban in here. This area over here is corridor redevelopment suburban, so it's a little different type of building design, setbacks, and those types of things. We're proposing the new, what's called a medium density residential district. So we've expanded into most of that RDD area now. This is all residential in here except for the church and some vacant property. So we're looking at that, making, in this case, all residential uses permitted except for multi-unit development, no ADUs, no private dormitories. So then if somebody wanted to come in and do townhouses or duplexes, which we're seeing some redevelopment, they would be able to come in if they meet the standards of the zoning ordinance, go ahead and get a permit, and go ahead and build, and not have to come and look at each parcel whether it's conditionally approved. The ADD use here would be conditional. Part of that is because this area, even though the boulevard is classified as a multi-unit, it is a bunch of 5-bedroom or duplexes with 5 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms that are geared to students. It may be appropriate conditionally for some of these other areas, but if it abuts single family neighborhood, it may not be appropriate. When we would be reviewing that, we would make either condition that they buffer it more or say that's not compatible. So that's where that conditional use has an opportunity for you to review it, for the neighbors to come and say, hey, has anybody thought about noise or the traffic or things like that? And so is there another step to an approval process. The RDD that's down along here is a new district that's CRDE that is, again, a corridor redevelopment. We're looking at making this area more walkable. So we don't want things like drive-through restaurants, drive-through banks, big box stores that are going to bring a lot of road traffic. We're looking at things like neighborhood restaurants, neighborhood retail shops, barber shops, things like that, where people that live in these areas, we get out and walk to.
Richie, would you tell us what the things?
Could you describe the CRD again? What's the acronym?
Corridor redevelopment.
Corridor redevelopment, and then the E stands for east, because we've got, this is our 4th district, we've got an urban, suburban, and then when we did Northwest Auburn, we created a west district. And there's just minimal changes to the setbacks and the types of uses in each one of these, but we've identified as an area for redevelopment.
What's CDD?
Commercial development.
CDD is the commercial development. This is the area that has some contractors' offices, some warehouses, some things that are already in place that we wanted to be able to find a zoning that's appropriate.
It stands for Comprehensive Development District, so it's our most accommodating district. It's the closest thing we have to a commercial district, but it also permits residential as well.
Comprehensive is the term you use, not
Yes, sir.
commercial.
It's actually
Sorry,
comprehensive.
right,
Yes, sir.
Right, CRDE is
Corridor
comprehensive.
redevelopment,
Corridor redevelopment east.
yes, east.
Well, I can understand how the folks in Northwest Auburn plan were confused with all the acronyms.
Well, we're glad you're asking questions. We're glad to clarify. And really, this table of uses is the best way to get a feel for what each one's intended to do. You can compare, and we'll get to it too, but if you have any question about kind of what the intention is, that table gives you a pretty good indicator.
Yeah, see, we don't get a key on this one either, we just get the acronym, and it'd be really helpful to get the full explanation of each one of those going forward, if it's at all possible. We can print us
In
that
the
out.
zoning ordinance text updates, we do describe it out. In our zoning ordinance, it'll say, medium density residential development, and then the acronym is in there. So we just do the shortcut, and I realize that's probably something that you're not familiar with, that looking at the zoning ordinance, you don't really know those buzz terms, and that's the plan of geekiness when we talk about it, like this.
There's also in Article 3 is actually a section that provides a narrative description of each district in the zoning ordinance. So that really, in like a paragraph, will kind of capture what the intent is.
It's just when you get a table like this, it's always good to just have a handy reference sheet to just refamiliarize ourselves.
This has the definitions right there.
As well,
You can find
It only has the new definitions, the older definitions are already in there, and that table then compares. You have to know what the RDD looks like, but it talks about the uses. The area that's currently NC5 here, that's got the highest concentration of owner occupied still, although we're seeing a lot more rental. It also is an area that's got a lot of duplexes or non-conforming structures there. So we're recommending a change to development district housing, which is only allows 2 unrelated, which the NC only allows 2 unrelated. So we're not increasing the occupancy, we're just allowing conditionally more types of housing. So the only thing that would be permitted by right in this district is single family. So if somebody wanted to do a duplex or any other type of performance housing, they would have to go through that conditional use process again to see whether it's compatible. If the whole lot's surrounded by owner-occupied properties that may not be compatible at this time to recommend doing a multi-unit development. So that's that
to
opportunity.
be keeping with the same characteristics that are.
Right, right. And just to look at what's permitted, the DDH, which is the current district that we have, allows for about 5.5 units per acre. All other types of residential except single family is conditional. Cottage development, private dormitory, and ADDUs would not be permitted in this district. There are no commercial districts, commercial uses allowed. There are some things like parks or maybe a public service utility use, or churches would be allowed in that district conditionally, but otherwise strictly residential.
So private dorm means ADDU in this case.
Private dorm is when you've got a bunch of them stacked together. The ADDU is that single unit.
Okay, well, you just said ADDU in that top category.
Would not be permitted. Right now, since there's no regulations for ADDU, this didn't talk about an ADDU. And until that's passed, then that's one of those things that
That
still
and
kind
it
of
would make
waiting.
its way into that box.
Yeah, exactly. The CDD, or the Comprehensive Development District, some performance residential is permitted by right. I think there's 4 different categories, and then when you get into more intense, like the multi-unit development, it's permitted conditionally. Again, in this district, private dormitory is not permitted. I don't believe that, I've asked for some, the ADDUs would not be permitted in CDD.
That's correct.
Yeah. Most commercial uses are permitted, even some warehousing and some road service and community support type uses are permitted. The MDRD is where we're getting into a new residential only district. This is that medium density residential district. Allows for 12 units per acre, so a little less than the RDD. And when we look at the RDD, sometimes with parking and everything, you can't get 12 units per acre on site. It would allow everything but the multiple unit development by right, private dormitory. The multiple unit would be conditional. Private dormitory, ADDUs, again, would not be. Private dormitory would not be. We're going to recommend ADDUs be a conditional use again, because we've got similar types in that district. No commercial uses, so just the same. This is just a little more intense, or a little has a little higher density. Part of that is because it's within walkable range of downtown, and so it makes sense to transition to a little more units per acre. And then our new CRDE takes a lot of the things from the other corridor redevelopment districts. We have a 10 unit per acre average. It allows residential uses by right, except again for apartment units. In this case, the private dormitory, and ADDUs, we're not recommending they be allowed because this district fronts on Glen Avenue. We'd really like to see a mixture of commercial with residential above it or within that area. And the key to this is to make this area, try to make it more desirable to not just students. We want young couples to come in and maybe want to rent property here or buy a property. Empty nesters, so we want it to be attracted to more people, which is why we put those ADDUs conditionally here and don't allow them here, is because we don't want to end up this just becoming a student neighborhood like we're starting to see over in Northwest Auburn. So just looking at back and forth here, we've got, this is what's existing, this is RDD and our neighborhood conservation. We're proposing a strictly residential area for most of this, which is currently residential, changing this single family neighborhood conservation district to a development district, which would allow for redevelopment of some low intensity uses, single family, some duplexes, twin homes. Keeping this then for our commercial uses and mixed uses, and then this up here is going to the comprehensive district, just to sort of find a zoning that would fit the uses that are currently up in that area.
Currently, right now, most activities is happening on the western part of the, with the AD, Ryan and Avenue.
Those on Ryan are not, those are just strictly townhomes.
Yeah,
so
okay,
they're
but
not-
you say activity wise.
But yeah, the redevelopment, yeah, we're seeing this, and then this area in here, we're seeing most of the redevelopment. We've seen, I think, one property here that has gone through a conditional use. We've not seen any.
And the proposed redevelopment with that, would it be in line with what you're proposing with rezoning?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of.
But it's gonna stay the same characteristic of the change.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, kind of the point that to make about the RDD is really restrictive. So we're trying to open it up a little bit, specifically for residential development.
Tom, what's the dwelling unit per acre for NC five and NC 12?
This NC 5 is a 5,000 square foot lot,
Okay.
which would be about 8 units per acre. NC 12 is 12,000, so it's just looking at about 3.5 units per acre.
So NC 5 is higher density than DDH?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you actually see a net decrease in the number of units between what's out there now and what the proposal would have. It's actually a net decrease in total units, but it does free up, like I said, that RDD goes away, and now residential development can take place by right instead of conditional for each project.
Some of these lots, I think probably this one's small. This is probably the 5,000 square foot lot. A lot of these others are bigger. They could be combined. You could take 3 lots, combine 2 lots and combine them and end up with 3 lots. So under the NC 5, they could get the density. I don't think they're that dense right now, 8 units per acre.
So in the NC 5 and 12, and those are more, currently, they're more affordable housing types comparative to Auburn as a whole.
The renter occupied.
Right, but for affordability, it's probably one of our, is it fair to say one of our few remaining areas of affordability for that price range, if you're gonna, and that's not and another pocket of affordable housing?
At this point, anybody could buy one of these, tear it down and build something bigger.
Sure,
That's going to cost more.
but they can
So-
afford to do that. I'm talking about the people who are needing that
Right.
housing.
But that competition is there. If I wanna come in and I see a house for $110,000 and I wanna buy it, somebody else sees it, says, I'll go 112 because I can afford it and I can build a bigger house. So unfortunately, that's what happens by changing this to allow the redevelopment of different housing types. But it does allow for twin homes and townhomes and things that typically have a lower cost than a single family home. Where right now, everything goes in there has to be a single family home, so this opens up for more types of permitted uses.
The age in this area, you said, I think the last was the seventies, was that the newest single family residential?
For single, yeah, for that area.
70s, so-
Yeah. And there's a couple, there's 3 or 4 vacant lots along here as well.
We're pushing about 50 years.
And a lot of the, we talked to a lot of the neighborhoods and the property owners. A lot of them are 1 bedroom, 2 bath, 3 baths, so it's again, a starter home. But the problem is a lot of that is, they don't have garages, they're sort of obsolete. So this would provide an opportunity for some redevelopment, not as dense.
We also had some concerns about, that is an NC, and we're always, whenever there's NC, we're hesitant to change it to anything else unless we know, we've talked to the neighbors, and, again, it's almost all renter occupied already. And the folks that do live there, a lot of them are, hesitant, but supportive, for the folks that we talk to. And then, like I said, the other folks are having it as investment property.
And what are you saying you can build back over there?
You can build twin homes, a townhome, a duplex, single family, cottage.
No,
No.
Yeah,
Fine.
cottages.
cottages.
And the CRD.
So the ones that are C are conditional. The only thing that's permitted by right in that district that you could pull a permit for tomorrow if it goes to DDH would be a single family home. Anything else would come to the council to look at. for approval.
I'm sorry, I think you mentioned, what is the unrelated occupancy
It's 2
in all DDH?
in all DDH, yes. So the change is not increasing the number of people that can live there. It's just allowing a few more types of housing. So this is where we get into the zoning text amendment. So these are the things that we adjust to make it fit the map that we're proposing. So our medium density residential district is designed to promote redevelopment of residential properties with a more diverse housing style. And at a higher density than the DDH or the development district housing. The district is intended to provide a transition from the lower density development district housing to the downtown area by just allowing for a little more density. Some of these other changes that you see, this is just represents that because we put this district in 8s before 13, we have to start reordering the other districts. So a lot of these changes are just to bring it into alignment. Here we're talking about that 4th unique sub-district to the corridor redevelopment, and that's this CRDE. We added 2 planned developments, so under the PDD in the medium density residential district, somebody could do a planned development of a larger piece of property. Again, these are just a reorganization. And Logan's gonna talk about this chart a little bit.
So our table of uses, again, it's really the best. If you really want to get down to the nitty gritty of what you can and can't do with each property in each zone, this is what we use to figure that out.
And I'll point out that this is the DDH, which is that residential district site. This is the new one we're proposing. We're putting side by side so you could compare the similarities and the differences. And then, of course, the CRDE is similar to the CRDU, so we lined it up there, but you still have the other ones to see what exactly the differences are in the land use.
It would be helpful then to have the NC
On there.
up there as a comparative as well. Just-
The NC's easy, just single family.
Okay, nothing else.
Yeah, nothing
Okay,
else, just
perfect.
just
Thank
single
you.
family.
Makes it easy.
Yeah, that's our favorite one, we know right off the bat. So as Tom was saying, the MDRD reflects really closely with DDH. We consider it kind of a bumped up DDH. So instead of having all these, where in DDH, it allows a lot of different uses, but they're all conditional for residential uses. The MDRD puts them by right, and some conditionally. Again, no private dormitory. I do want to point out the ADU, if it is passed, the MDRD would be conditional, so it would come before you. And then
Well,
going.
and I might add, you have the opportunity with this too to decide if you don't think it's appropriate in this district, you can change that as well. But this was written based upon having some ADU regulations in place.
I'll start here in MDRD and kind of just go down the list. So one difference between DDH and the MDRD is that there's a little bit more institutional uses allowed. And then going down into commercial uses, just like DDH, no commercial uses. Some public service uses, pretty much the same that would be allowed in DDH. Just go down the line there, see that they're roughly the same, except MDRD allows for more, the biggest difference being that allows for more different types of residential uses by right. The CRDE, again, if you go back and think about the future land use recommendation as well for mixed use, this is really what we're trying to encourage is mixed use development in the CRDE. So again, it pairs nicely with CRDU. We're going for a more urban type of development. Lots of different performance residential types permitted by right. Again, private dormitory is not allowed, and ADDU, as proposed, would not be allowed in this zoning district. When we get into the commercial uses, you'll see we really wanted to look at each one and think about, does it fit into the neighborhood? Could this fit in a neighborhood context? So using that kind of methodology, we either chose permitted by right or conditional. The things that could kind of go either way would be being too big of a scale for a neighborhood, we put as conditional, and then things that we felt were pretty safe for a neighborhood, permitted by right. And the biggest one to look at is these so road service uses, these are, in CRDU, a lot of these are conditional or permitted by right. We've wanted to limit those as much as possible. Road service uses are typically on key intersections, that kind of thing, so pretty heavy, pretty intense type development, so we want to not allow those in CRDE. So again, just CRDE, quick way to remember it, it's kind of like CRDU, but allows for more residential uses, and the commercial uses are more neighborhood context based instead of wide open.
So that's talking about the use of the property. When we get into these other sections, then we're looking at how that property develops from a setback, a height, those types of standards.
Did you have any questions about the table of uses?
Some of them don't make sense, but I mean, y'all are.
Yeah, I mean, this is open for discussion, changes.
Like an ATM machine versus a bank, I mean.
Yeah, ATM could fit on let's say you had a barber shop and they want to put an ATM in it. Like, it's a lot different than a whole bank site. But again, we're open to any changes.
What are like, and I don't want to be offensive when I ask this question, but like title pawn and those type of uses, where do they have a separate category?
They are.
Okay.
Pawn shop, conditional, in CRDE.
And then title pawn, okay, they are separate, okay.
So now we're looking at a table of what we would consider a development standard, how the property can develop. The medium density residential district, here we're allowing more density at 12 units per acre. Because it's more urban, closer to downtown area, there's less of a requirement for open space. So part of the open space that comes along with some of this development is that you have, that a large piece of property, usually in a residential area with a homeowners association. As these properties redevelop, there may not be a homeowners association on a lot by lot basis. And then the corridor redevelopment east, you notice the density is the same as what we've got for the corridor redevelopment suburban and the west area. Open space is the same type of requirement. There's some caveats that if they're small lots or townhomes, then they don't necessarily have to have a separate open space lot platted. As far as just things that are not residential, which fall into that, each different category of housing has its own development standards. But if you have things like the outdoor recreation, any institutional uses, then these are the standards that's set up, and they very much mimic what we've got under the development district housing. Not all, since this district is going to be inside Sugar Jordan, there's probably not going to be any need for agricultural uses in a more urban context. And then looking at the corridor redevelopment east, again looking very similar to the urban characteristics, allowing a little more. We've got to put, this is our FAR and RASR. So FAR is the floor area ratio. And so if you have an acre of ground, you can cover half of it with the building. And then the ISR would allow for pervious surface for parking. So you can cover half of it with the building, and then the rest of the lot could be, you could have 40% of the lot in some type of pervious pavement. And then again, we just have these few uses that are along here. The intent of this is to have a little more density, a little less green space, more walkable. You don't want to have, when you have a walkable community, you don't want to have a lot of distance between buildings.
Okay, so we don't have, in here, the setbacks and so forth, that information.
It's coming.
Yeah, there's a table now. We went from that. What used to be the RDD was for every foot of height, you had a foot of setback. And we're prescribing this at a certain number, certain distance, similar to what we did in the downtown. So if somebody comes in and wants to develop on the site, it'll tell them you've got to be 15 feet from the front setback. And I'm using it hypothetical, we'll see that in the chart. And then so far from the rear and the side.
What is your column there that has feet? You don't have any label.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is the lot width. So in that district, to be able to use a road service use, your lot has to be a minimum of 75 feet wide. So sometimes when you're in a neighborhood that's with smaller lots, some of these uses aren't going to be able to locate there because the lot width is just not big enough for the lot size.
Does this answer or address somebody, say, just for example, they wanted to combine a bunch of lots and ask for conditional use for multi-family development? Like, so we avoid another 160 or where it's just one continuous frontage? Did we address that at all?
We attempted to do that with the downtown development, and the planning commission at the time didn't feel like that the length of the building was a big issue, and they didn't make the recommendation. We do have, for multi-unit development, language that talks about every 100 feet the building has to undulate. So come forward or setback so you don't get a flat plane. You can see how that was played out next door, right, on Ross. So,
I mean, as a conditional use, there would, any conditions that the planning commission would see fit to put on the property, they have the purview to do so. I don't know what that is limited by aesthetically, but
right.
At least in some.
Because we had looked at a wide range of different widths and street. Typically, from planning, the width of your street's going to determine the height of your building and the scale of the building. If you've got a narrower street, you don't want to see really tall, long buildings. But, and from a planning standpoint, those are the things that we look at and say, this building's pretty massive on this site. We would recommend something else. And so now if you see that, then you feel free to ask that question. I think that's a very important question. Okay, and then this section is just talking about planned developments, adding the medium density residential district. And then we have a section that as a PDD is developed, you're only allowed to develop so much of a property, and then when you get to that threshold, you have to finish the development. So if you had, in this case, if you allow 16 units per acre and you have 2 for an acre and a half, you could only develop 16 units before you have to finish out the plan. And so that just keeps somebody from developing, taking half of the project and building everything on it and then leaving this other space. And then this is the design table where we talk a little more about the setbacks for the CRDE. Again, it's going very similar to the CRDU, which is across the railroad tracks from on Opelika Road. A minimum front setback, side setbacks, and then a total side is if you got a property on the corner of a street, you've got to have a 10-foot setback from the one that's not on the street. Then your other street side is 10 feet. And that's where the total side comes in, 10 plus 10. Because we've got some districts that have a 10-foot setback or a 30-foot total, but if they're on the street, you want to make sure that both of those are set back further. So that's an explanation on.
I think just
Yeah.
as we don't have all the pages here.
Yeah, so we're missing like 12, we're missing 14, and we're missing 16.
Oh.
I've got some extras here, maybe?
No.
Okay. My apologies.
Yeah, that's what I was asking about the setback things, because they're not.
Here's your setbacks right here. And that, so if that's not in that chart right there, that's the chart
It's
here,
in there.
I think. Yeah. So front setbacks.
They take 15 or 16.
Right, but like
Well,
when you
you don't
did the
have
50, see, I go from 427.
Okay, this report only highlights the areas of the ordinance that's changed and not the whole one. So we picked out the area that there's a change and put that in there. So there's some sections that what's going on doesn't affect the zoning ordinance, so we don't typically put those in. So there's not any change to the setbacks, it's just adding the CRDE to the same development standards as the corridor redevelopment urban. I'm glad you pointed that out, Councilman Parsons, because we tend to talk planner stuff with the planning commission. They understand it.
Yeah.
And when we talk to other
You've
people.
got to imagine me like I'm 5.
And I'm 20. Okay, and then with the table, this is particular to the corridor redevelopment east, and it allows residential uses to be on the first floor buildings along Glen and Harper Avenue, but they have to have the front door facing those streets. So you can't put them on the side of a lot or to the rear. The main entrance has to address the street. Again, this is a walkability issue and how to make the streets feel more engaged. And then a parking requirement down here for the CRDE. The parking needs to be behind the front facade of a building instead of having parking lots in front. Again, the parking lot, when you walk by, parking lots aren't interesting. Sometimes people feel a little less secure if you're walking along, you got building, and then all of a sudden the building's back and there's parking lot. You lose that sense of safety from the human scale. And it also addresses the fact that parking lot areas, if you do have a parking lot along the facade, so here's the front of the building, you want to put your parking over here, it needs to be screened with fence and some landscaping instead of just bleeding out onto the street. And if you're on a corner lot, say like at Glen and Ryan, if you're going, you need to get your parking or your access off of Ryan because it's not the busy street. And that helps to keep traffic moving along Glen. So It's a safety and aesthetic issue.
I'm sorry,
And this-
it said along the lowest what?
The lowest, oh, didn't pull that down, it's in there. I think it's the lowest street classification. So if you have a local and a collector, the local is a lower classification, so the access has to come from. What happened with some of these tables is when they got inserted from Excel to PowerPoint, the height changed, and so. We still got real. And then this is just an example of a couple of recent developments. This one's not in the Harper Avenue area, it's just outside of it. This is the one on North Ryan. You notice the building is set far back from the street frontage. You've got all the parking in front of it. And then you've got the buildings on the other side that are closer to the street, and so it creates an issue. In the case of the last one, they're on the back property line, there's residents behind it that have got a commercial use that's sitting close to the property. And then the rest of these, there's really no change in here to the rest of that table, except that in the sign area, we've included the CRD into the particular corridor redevelopment district sign regulations.
There's a test, right?
It is.
So go to test now?
Yeah, what does CRDE mean?
Hold on, I've got to refer to my notes.
That open book test.
And it is a lot of material, but happy to answer any questions, concerns.
So what are we voting on for this at the city council? Do anybody know?
These recommended changes, correct?
So the text and map, zoning map, text
Maybe that until we have the ADDU part rolled into it though, right?
I'm sorry?
Right.
We gotta do the ADDU part rolls into this.
Yes.
So until we vote on one, what we've just seen did not include the ADDU, right?
No, it did.
It did.
The only thing that's ADDU related about the Harper Avenue study is the recommendation that it be a conditional use in the MDRD.
Okay.
It's just not inserted in some of the informational boxes, that's all. It's not.
Right,
we're
yeah,
assuming that-
that's what we.
that's-
Like right there.
We know where it belongs if it gets
Right.
passed.
Okay.
Yeah, it's unusual to have, that's part of the confusion with this, is it's unusual to have, and we try not to do this, we try not to schedule more than one zoning ordinance project or amendment at a time, because they all build on each other. So sometimes we've got two that end up running concurrently. And that's why I talked about some of those clarifications you would need to make if you deem fit to approve it. The things that weren't actually advertised, those three issues that we discussed pretty explicitly, we'll just need to call those out as part of the motion if you see fit to approve it next week.
The ADDUs would be inserted either before or after the private dormitory in there, and then you would see the numbers per the zoning districts or the conditional and permitted. It's part
So
of it.
we're gonna vote on ADDU first, and then this, is that the order of business for Tuesday?
Most probably, unless, council
Right.
changes things.
Yeah, they'll both be under the ordinance section of the agenda.
And they all have public hearings attached to them. Okay.
We do nothing. Is there-
Yeah. Technically, the ADDU hearing was closed.
No, we didn't have it. Did we have it?
We did.
Oh, we did have it.
You can always, obviously.
We can always have one, and
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
not required to have it publicized because we've already had one.
Okay, that's right. But you can't open it up again.
Okay.
Doing nothing, not adopting the design we anticipate foresee this area.
Can't hear you, sorry.
What do you, not adopting the revisions or the proposed changes to the zoning, how do you see this area going?
I mean, they'll just continue, I mean, it won't be the end of the world, things will just continue the way that they've been continuing. Like I said, what I find to be beneficial to the approach that we've taken with really all of our initiatives is we're being deliberately more sensitive to context and neighborhood character. And so what you have now is you kind of have a broad brush of zoning that I think doesn't really address the unique attributes of neighborhoods on a block by block basis. This does that. So over time, I think what you'll see is more compatible development, and you'll begin to actually see kind of how things methodically transition as you move away from the core. Right now, we're not able to do that because we have a one-size-fits-all zoning scheme, and we're trying to move away from that so that our the end results are better than perhaps what they have been in the past.
Of course, we had, it might have been in the last several months, we had a couple of items before us on Glen, and there was much discussion about front versus rear parking. Is that in this?
Yes.
It is.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, we're really trying to get toward getting the parking in the back along the corridor so that you really have kind of a nice urban form along the road, mixed-use development. And I try not to pick out developments to criticize them, but I do think it's important to see and be able to compare, and most people will agree on what's, if you take two, which one's more desirable. And, you know, there's a couple of projects there where you see the actual use set way back from the street, you can see the parking in front, and I think we would say that that would be less desirable than having the parking screen. It makes for a much more appropriate pedestrian way too. Because I think we all see this as we continue to infill and redevelopment. And I know I do. I see so much more foot traffic on Opelika Road now. Used to see no foot traffic on Opelika Road. I see much more foot traffic on Glen sidewalks now than I did 5 years ago. And I think that's a good thing. And I think we're gonna see that continue to be the case. And I think as long as we're having redevelopment that's appropriate and fosters that, we'll continue to see more foot traffic.
We're probably gonna need a little bit of infrastructure change over there too. Harper's gonna need a sidewalk, right?
There's gonna be some sidewalk pedestrian lighting, that's all.
And then interchange Harper and Glen would be nice. That's something we could use.
I mean, I see students that are walking from the boulevard,
Yeah.
they're walking to campus. And there's a lot more foot traffic on Ross. It's good. I mean, it's what we've hoped for.
The Kroger intersection is a problem, there's a lot of internal discussion about what possibly could happen. It's too close to two other stoplights, so putting another stoplight drastically would make an effect on traffic. There's no way to tie it into a good crosswalk, but you're right, a lot of times you'll see people either darting across on a car or walking across at night, and that becomes an issue. Something didn't mention, I want to point out, in the RDD, changing it to this area here in the CRDE limits the building height to 35 feet. Or right now, if you own a big piece of property and you've got enough room for 100 feet, 100 feet, 100 feet, 100 feet, you could build a 100-foot tall building. Because that 1-to-1 does not limit, the only thing that limits that height is the size of your lot. So we're trying to bring that building height and control that, similar to how we've done in the urban neighborhoods, south and east, and the rest of the CRD neighborhoods.
So speaking about Glen, back to that Kroger intersection, do you think we'll put out more islands like we did on Opelika Road? We've got and at the post office, to slow some of that traffic down? I don't know if that's part of the redevelopment plan.
Yes, part of that comes in with the Glen Dean.
Yeah.
And if this gets redeveloped and you don't have all the needs for driveways, there might be some way to do that.
Yeah.
And again, engineering and public works have discussed that a lot.
I get a ton of feedback on that intersection, that whole, that Glen and Dean and the Kroger intersection.
Are these maps, can we access them digitally online already on your website?
I
On
think
the city
there's,
website?
it's not the most up to date, but we can certainly get it updated.
So the Harper Avenue, who's this?
Little portion of yours.
Oh.
In an email, these maps?
We're gonna send them to
What's it, Chief?
Yeah, I can do that. If you guys would just package it,
Sure.
assuming it's good enough for now, smaller, you know.
We'll make sure.
I just sent it all to him.
So in your opinion though, with this future, with the proposed plan, we're gonna keep the characteristics of where this is naturally been headed. And it's gonna preserve the neighborhoods.
Yes, it's to preserve it, to make it more walkable, to try to make it less, try to make it appealing to more than just students. I think that's the key is to make it appealing to other people that want to live close to downtown or be able to walk. Kroger's is at one end, other than that intersection, you could walk to the grocery store, some of the other uses, you can walk to downtown.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for sharing this. I'm glad we did this now because we weren't prepared to vote on this, I don't think, a week ago. So thank y'all very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the
Thank you.
May I mention one other subject while we have the council?
Oh, okay.
I sent a note to you and to Jim and to Ron about the role of the neighborhood liaison position. And I don't want to say to everybody, somebody might think we're deliberating something. But I would like to get some clarification on what A.J. Harris's role is. And I think A.J.'s a great guy. He's been very useful to me when he comes to the board meetings. And I didn't know he was there in an official capacity until he was already there. I just don't want, I would prefer personally that if a neighborhood association or someone requests something, that we are at least aware of it, that doesn't go strictly from AJ to Jim. I just want to find out what y'all think about that, because when we first talked about the reorganization, I remember Beth, you mentioned, why are we doing that? Because that's really the councilman's role, is to interact with the constituents. And now we have a third party kind of inserted in the middle of it. And I just want to kind of clarify how we can, how we use that resource. AJ he is a valuable resource as far as I'm concerned. He's very helpful. But I don't want to have a constituent issue bypass the council member and us not be aware of it. So how do we want to approach that?
So AJ's job is to get the message out to the public, mainly the neighborhood groups. It's where I see him being effective, those people who have HOAs and that and he'd be able to, if we have like it's coming up, now this is going to be in Northwest Auburn, but we have these, every year we clean up a neighborhood or an area of neighborhoods. And so getting that information out, also taking in information from them as to them communicating back to us. It's more efficient and better for the citizens if they can directly communicate their concerns, and we can directly communicate to them to kind of figure out what it is that they're having an issue with, and we can get it solved more quickly. Now that doesn't mean that you're out of the loop and that we don't necessarily, keep you from knowing what the people in your area are talking about. But if they can communicate with us directly, we can solve their issues much more quickly. And maybe we can't, but at least we can address their issues much more quickly. Then what I've noticed since the election is, and we hadn't had this previously, is that we are hearing from a council member about a citizen's complaint, not even who that citizen is, but I have a citizen who's complaining about this. Well, then our first question is, well, where does that citizen live? We have to get all that information. It goes back and forth several times. Whereas if the communication is directly from the council member to AJ or directly the council member to me, then talk to the city manager, or talk to AJ, or even talk to the public works director or the planning director, then our staff can communicate with those individuals, get all the information, and try to solve the issue. We can still keep you appraised of what's going on, and gets involved is you, or when the council member gets involved is usually when the citizen can't get their issue resolved with us, then they go to the council and say, hey, you know, I've tried doing this, but we seem to be doing it backwards. We seem to be bypassing staff already and just going directly from council, or from citizen to council member, to staff, back to council member, back to citizen, back to council member, back to staff. And it's taken us much longer, I think, much more inefficient to do that. I would like to see AJ bridge some of that and be able to directly communicate not only issues, but messages. You know, what's coming up when, and it affects not only the neighborhood, but the city as a whole.
And like I said, I do appreciate his role and his insight into things that I don't have insight into as far as operations of the city. But the fact that we can't talk to AJ directly, you know, efficiency is not one of the hallmarks of our government to start with. So, I still, I'm a little concerned, a little confused sometimes, I think, is that I want to know what my constituents' concerns are. And if AJ receives a concern or a complaint or a compliment, and it's being processed, I want to know it's being processed. I want to know what the issue was, because maybe it's a common issue across the constituency. Maybe it's not just one person. Maybe you've heard it elsewhere. So, I mean, the whole premise that when a constituent contacts me, I send it to you, to me is vastly inefficient to start with. But I understand the prohibition of talking to a department head. And I try to encourage citizens to contact department heads or whoever, you know, can handle it. But like it or not, you know, the issues come to the council member. And I just think we need to figure out how is it, maybe there's a standard procedure that when AJ receives something from a constituent that he automatically copies one of us. You know, we can't reply back to him. That's what I'm concerned about. We still have to go through you if we want to get involved in anything.
Well,
so you got AJ stuck in the middle, and he can do anything he wants.
And I think that's, and again, you know, traditionally, council does not get into the minutia of the daily operation. Traditionally, council has set policy and direction. They're the board of directors of the corporation. They don't, you know, really get into the minutia of the daily operation. Staff does that. Now, council, like I said, when staff can't accommodate a constituent, then that constituent will go and talk to their representative and let them know that they didn't get this done.
Well, they're talking to us one way or another, whether they get it.
But
one way or another, they're talking to us. I mean, we're not going to control that.
And yeah, that's not a control of who's talking to you. It's trying to be as responsive as possible to the needs of the citizenry as a whole. And, you know, we will be coming out here, and I think you saw that, I don't know if it was in Weekly News, I can't remember if it was in there, but we're coming out with an app that will let people communicate with us electronically through that app. Report a pothole, report a street light out, you know, report a broken sidewalk, whatever it is, through the app, which will then go directly to the department that's responsible for that particular, whatever it is. If it's a pothole, it goes to Public Works. If it's a planning issue, for planning, and they can do that all electronically. So we're trying to become as efficient as we can in a government organization that needs to be deliberately not slow, but we have to make sure we take in everyone's opinion before we make a decision. So it is somewhat slows down the process, but we're still trying to streamline that process as much as possible.
So what type of scenarios do you envision AJ is dealing with? Someone whose trash didn't get picked up because they forgot to roll their can out, or?
I see AJ communicating the message, let's say, I don't know, about the neighborhood cleanup in Northwest Auburn that's coming up, that whole area. And I see AJ communicating that to maybe your ward meeting, when you have a ward meeting just before that neighborhood cleanup. whatever it is that we have to communicate to that portion of the city, and then taking back from us what he learned at that work meeting. I don't see him as a bypass to the council, or to him going out and saying, you satisfied? Well, one thing that I think would have been, we just got, which one of you all, maybe it was just Ron, I got a communication from a gentleman in Eastlake about WOW in the Eastlake division, and I think Ron got that message. Now, I would have seen AJ's role that when we know that WOW is going into that area, inform those people, let them know, hey, WOW is coming into this area. They're going to be messing up the
By way of social media, or?
We do that through social media and that, but this is just one more way of interacting with these HOAs, because a lot of the message isn't getting out. And things like that, there are certain rules and regulations that these companies are supposed to follow. They're supposed to put a hang tag on your door, they're supposed to put a sign up that says, we're gonna be working in this area, and they don't. And so this is a way to communicate that, and if it's not happening, let us know. So, and, Eastlake is just the most recent, and with Point Broadband coming, you're gonna see a lot of that, because when WOW first started, we got nothing but complaints from people.
So what about, I think to your point, neighborhoods or pockets of town that don't have an HOA and don't have a formalized communication process, how will they be notified? Door to door?
Well, no, those would be still through your ward meeting. Those would be the council's ward meetings. I mean, those type of things will still have to be done the same way as we're doing it now. That's how, through your different meetings, through, the council members, whatever you have, whatever contacts you have, that has to be.
So AJ, is he gonna be, at, just like I'm having a ward meeting, so he knows that I'm gonna have you relay that to AJ about the ward meeting. So if he have any information that he needs that pertains to that ward, he's there for the purpose of to give out that information?
He would tell you.
Oh, he would tell me?
And if you wanted him there, yes.
Okay.
It's your ward meeting.
No, but can I say, well, AJ, you got any information you wanna share with us? So he can get up and he can, okay.
And for
Okay,
for
see,
you.
I'm glad I know that, because I just thought he was, coming with whoever his superior was. I didn't know he had a
Well,
role.
right now, he's just trying to learn.
Okay.
That's all he's trying to do. But I see that first for your area, that first big cleanup, because we got a map, I just saw the map that we have of the area, what's gonna be affected, what type of stuff we're doing.
Well, I'm glad to know that, because I'm having one coming up, so I really need him to let him know that.
Right.
Will AJ catalog his communications in a way that you or staff sees it, that could then be in a, simplistic form, an Excel spreadsheet by ward, that can then just be a report that's given?
We can, and I think part of what we've talked about is with this new app,
I think the app is an awesome idea.
he can communicate it that same way, so when he gets a complaint, he just puts it in the app, and then it's all there.
Okay.
And then the report can be given to the council, individuals or to the council.
That would give us the opportunity to follow up too, if we wanted to, as council members.
Yeah, I mean, if you got a report, yeah, you can say,
And I'm imagining not everything we want to follow up on, but some things, large things.
I agree. Yeah, the intent is not to keep you out of the loop at all.
Oh, yeah.
Jim, you mentioned, since this election, you've seen a kind of a different kind of dynamic from the city council to you from citizens. In the interest of efficiency, if I get a communication with a citizen who has not contacted city staff before me, in an ideal world for you, I would forward you the entire email. If it was appropriate, if there was.
If it was appropriate, what's important to us
That's what I
is name, phone number, email, address.
Gotcha.
So that we can then communicate to that individual when we have questions. So they may say, like, there's a problem, well, and we want this fixed and that, well, we may have some questions that we want to communicate back before we can marshal everything.
Without doing the tennis, the ping pong
Right.
through the.
Right, so we can communicate directly, yeah, there's, and, you know, whatever the reason, I don't know, but we are getting much more direct from council member, and then back to council member, to, citizen, back through council member, back to us.
Right.
We're getting that a lot more than what, well, and something you and I just did with Stephen, there was a gentleman, I can't even remember his issue. And remember, I sent you and said, have him call Scott directly, and that will really help him resolve his issue rather quickly, rather than going through us. I don't even remember what it was.
Well, certainly not all that can be avoided, because some situations require us to be in the loop,
Right.
step by step, and then some situations are pretty simple to solve and should just be
Right.
passed off and managed, and then just an update saying this has been handled, or, you know, but, right, our job is not to be in the day-to-day, but it is our job to be aware of what our constituents' concerns and needs are, so it's really
And
a
understand
balance.
if it comes to us, did we do it or not?
Correct, follow through, absolutely.
And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. AJ has been very useful for me at my board meetings, providing answers to things. But if AJ gets an inquiry from somebody and y'all handle it, I'd like to do that.
But is that, and so to play devil's advocate, is that an inquiry of, I didn't get my trash picked up today, so please come pick it up, or is that a higher level situation? Like what level?
Good question. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's what I'm trying to sort out, is
Yeah.
where he fits in the chain, because our inability to talk to him means we have to go through Jim one way or another.
so it might be important for that position, and we keep saying AJ, because AJ's.
Well, he's the
He may not be there
incumbent.
forever,
Yeah.
but that position, it may be important for that position to be aware of kind of what the level of, and, you know, if it's day-to-day things like the trash that get picked up, move on. But if it's a situation where there's gonna be additional angst and concern and problems, and to elevate it to you so that the council member is involved in the situation. So maybe some.
I'd like to be able to make that decision. Maybe we have a list, I think it'd be helpful. Yeah, we can gauge it ourselves too. Maybe it's the
Well,
council.
and I think, like I said, if we do what I'm hoping we get done, and it should be within the next month, you will see it hopefully within the next month. And everything he gets will actually be part of that app process, so that the report will come to you, you'll see it, whether he gets it, whether they put it in themselves, whether I get it.
If he sets up a meeting with the homeowner association, or they stay
Oh,
calm.
now, something like that,
I don't-
definitely, he's not gonna set up a meeting in your ward without letting you know
Okay.
that there's gonna be a meeting, no. I'm looking at it not from that perspective, I'm looking at it from the perspective of dealing with citizen complaints as quickly and efficiently as we can. I'm not looking at it from, we're going there without letting you know. If we're going there, first of all, we're gonna let you know to decide, is this a good time? We would want you there and let you know what it is we're talking about before we even decide to tell them.
And on the app, is it possible that that's something that this council can be versed on prior to it making its way to the general public, just so that we can communicate it to our constituents? And, you know, as it's happening, and so, because you know, my biggest thing is, I don't like to read something in the paper and not have been told about it. So it's kind of like the same thing with a neighborhood specialist, like the same thing, like, we just don't want to be caught off guard, and we just don't want to be not able to effectively communicate with our constituents in a knowledgeable format. And it is okay for us to say, let me get some more information and get back to you, but.
Oh, yeah, I've already talked about it, we will set up probably a work session like this.
Okay.
To go through it all, to give you all, before it goes out.
that answer everything? I mean, do we need to?
I gotta go.
Okay.
Sorry.
I mean, maybe after our next, council meeting, packet meeting, further discussion on it?
Yeah.
Or just-
Okay. Alright. Yes, sir. We're adjourned?
Thank you very much.
No.
Thank you.
Are you going to have the speaker at 4? Is that what you headed now?
No, I got other.
Oh.
Feels 99.9%.